Hey everyone, and welcome back to a new video. So today's video is going to be a really difficult one to listen to and talk about, just to warn you in advance. We are going to be discussing the severe mistreatment of children in the Ruby Franke and Jodi Hildebrandt situation, which you may know because of Ruby's history with 8 passengers and family vlogging and all that kind of thing. And this is a tough one. I have literally been in tears several times while making this video. Like last night at midnight, I was just like leaving Kieran these voice notes of me just like sobbing my heart out, being like, I can't do this. It was awful. So if you need to give this video a miss, if you need to watch it in chunks, if you just want to avoid it altogether and whatever, like absolutely fine. Do what you need to, put yourself first. You got this. So for some context, approximately 6 months ago, I made a video about family vlogger Ruby Franke and Connexions founder Jodi Hildebrandt, in which I looked back at their history of online content centered around parenting advice and relationship advice, all with this kind of very heavily religious fundamentalism focus kind of thing. And I spoke about how both women had recently, at the time, been arrested for child abuse. If you haven't seen that video, I will link it in the video description for this one, and I do recommend going and giving it a watch because even though it's long, it provides a lot of context for the update we're going to be talking about today. Since then, Ruby and Jodi have both pleaded guilty to, and I quote, 4 counts of second-degree aggravated child abuse and have, according to an NBC News article, received 4 separate prison sentences of 1 to 5 years to serve consecutively. I still don't think that's enough. When you see what they did to these kids, when you hear Ruby recounting everything in her diary with no remorse, when you see that both of them still do not care about what they've done, they don't show remorse, regret, they're not sorry, it's not long enough. It simply isn't. Very recently, the Washington County Attorney's Office released a whole bunch of evidence surrounding this case, which really tells us what happened to these kids, and it is absolutely heartbreaking. There are videos, which is mostly police body cam footage. There's audio of an interview with Kevin Franke. There's audio of phone calls made by Ruby and Jodi from prison. There's photos of the crime scene and the poor children and what happened to them. Those photos have literally been haunting me. It's like they are burned into my head and I can't unsee them, and it's awful. There's also a lot of documents of like police reports, arrest reports, incident reports, and one of the other things we're going to be looking at today is they've released certain pages and extracts from a diary that Ruby kept at the time. I honestly was conflicted about making this video, and I'm definitely not going to show you a lot of the things that were released. Like, I'm not showing the photos of the children or anything like that because it's stomach churning, and I mean, it's out there if you want to go and look, but I wouldn't recommend it. But I also want to make sure that I'm not just like, I don't know, milking a situation that's getting attention. I don't just want to talk about this stuff for the sake of talking about it. But thinking about it some more, I do think it's important to bring these situations to light, because like in the last video I said a lot of things about how like, oh, you know, the warning signs were there, and we were looking at the Connexions content, we were looking at the old 8 passengers videos and being like, see, there were warning signs, why didn't anyone do anything, why didn't blah 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 blah. I was talking about, like, you know, some of the religious teachings that they were putting forward and saying like, see, and this could be harmful for this reason, and this could damage the children in this way and this way. But at the time it kind of felt a lot like hypotheticals, and I was talking about what could happen, what may happen, how this could harm people. Whereas what we're seeing here is, no, this is how it has harmed people. This is how these children were harmed because of these teachings. And one of the things we're going to see, especially in like the phone calls from Jodi in prison, especially from Ruby's diary and that sort of thing, is you can see directly how these teachings that they were preaching and trying to push onto everyone else were what directly caused them to harm the children. And I think that's something that is worth talking about and pointing out, because I have spent a lot of time over these last few years on YouTube talking about these hypothetical dangers. I review Christian books or Muslim books or, I don't know, any kind of religious fundamental books, and I say, see, and this teach will harm, and I say things like, see, this teaching is harmful for X, Y, and Z reasons. This could cause harm by doing this and this and this. And, you know, we bring in some academic theory, we might bring in some statistics, but this is one of the examples of, like, no, this isn't a hypothetical, this has happened. These religious teachings have caused physical and emotional trauma for real children. I kind of hope this will be a wake-up call to some people to realise how serious and harmful these issues can be. When online content creators post harmful stuff, whether that's bad parenting advice, bad relationship advice, hate speech, or anything at all, like, it's not just people saying stuff online drama. It can and will have real world consequences. Whether that is the person who is saying this stuff mistreating people in the background, or the people listening to them using these teachings as justification to go on and mistreat people. Either way, it's not just online drama and nonsense. This is something that affects real people and hurts real people. And that is worth talking about, I think. So like I say, this isn't a drama video. This isn't just like gawk at something bad that's happened. This isn't a, ooh, let's get the juicy gossip. This is a warning for how dangerous fundamentalists can be, especially those like Ruby and Jodi who exhibit cult-like behaviour. Because that's what they were doing. They were running a cult. And that is very obvious when you see all of this. I've said in so many videos in the past that I think that, you know, like, even people who do bad things can become good people. I believe in redemption and re-education, and even people who have done wrong, I don't think they're inherently bad people. But I don't think that's true in this case. This is one of these rare exceptions where I think Ruby and Jodi are pure evil. They have to be, to do the things they have done to these kids. There is no excuse. There is no way to explain what they've done. It is just evil. I do think they're beyond redemption. And I do think their prison sentences are far too light. And I just think they're sick people. I have no sympathy for them at all. I hope they rot in prison. I really do. So, the Washington County Attorney's Office provided a summary of the case, which reads, the women were arrested after Mr. Franke's 12-year-old son climbed out of the window on Miss Hildebrandt's Ivins, Utah residence, ran to a neighbour's home and asked for help. The neighbour observed duct tape on the boy's ankles and wrists, severe wounds, and malnourishment. He quickly contacted law enforcement, who, upon arrival, learned that potentially more children remained inside Miss Hildebrandt's home and in harm's way. The officers responded to Miss Hildebrandt's home, placed her under arrest, and conducted a search of her sizable property, where they found Miss Franke's 9-year-old daughter petrified and hiding in a closet. The ensuing investigation revealed Miss Franke and Miss Hildebrandt held Franke's 12-year-old son and 9-year-old daughter in a work camp-like setting. The children were regularly denied food, water, beds to sleep in, and virtually all forms of entertainment. They were also prohibited from interacting with others and were hidden in the home when others came to visit. They were forced to do physical tasks like carrying loaded boxes up and down stairs and sitting against a wall without a chair or stool for hours at a time. The children were also forced to do manual labour outdoors in the extreme summer heat without shoes or socks. They were similarly forced to stand outside on a cement patio in the summer heat for hours and even days. They were beaten, and the 12-year-old was bound hand and foot after a previous attempt at running away. Additionally, the children suffered emotional abuse to the extent that they came to believe that they deserved the abuse. The investigation found that religious extremism motivated Miss Franke and Miss Hildebrandt to inflict this horrific abuse. So that's the summary of the case. What we're going to be doing in this video is going through the evidence for this, discussing it, and it's not going to be easy. I even feel emotional now, God. As I mentioned briefly before, I speak about religious extremism a lot in quite a number of my videos, and I think it's really important to recognise that what happened with Ruby and Jodi here is what happens when those extreme and fundamentalist religious beliefs go unchecked and end in harmful delusions which are used to justify abuse. Not all cases are this extreme, but many are, and we need to realise that sometimes the clips that we critique and talk about on YouTube, like these, for example.
The second that baby comes into the world, the second, they're independent of you, of anyone. And they will start making their own choices. Even though we probably don't connect babies with agency, they have it. And they're utilizing it from the second they're in the world. They may see something flash over here and they may turn their head to look. That's a choice they're making.
This mom writes in about her 2-year-old little girl who is learning to be deceptive. 2 years old. She says, I need guidance on how to teach truth to young children in a way that they can comprehend. She says, my daughter just turned 2 years old and is experimenting with lying and deceitful behavior. I have security cameras in my home and caught her sneaking cookies in the kitchen while her dad was supposed to be watching her. I found her, cookie in hand, and asked her where she got it. She blamed her older sister, who was with me the entire time. And you start teaching them from day one about their agency. And so this 2-year-old is making choices that are selfish. And a 2-year-old, they go through this selfish stage. You can call it a selfish stage. You can call it a me stage. A lot of 2-year-olds start learning to say no, no, no. And they make everything about themselves. And they take everything, it's so physical. The best way to do this is to combine the physical with the abstract. So what you did was you said lying is wrong. Okay, so she's gonna have to think abstractly to understand that. And really she's had all this experience in the physical world by being touching and tasting and smelling and seeing and hearing. And so if you could come up with a visceral experience, which means this hands-on lab experience, to go with, hey, lying is wrong, lying is distortion. You start teaching her about truth and distortion. You start teaching her that blame is dropping responsibility. All of that is abstract, and come up with a physical experience that you can combine with that. She'll start putting the two together much quicker.
There are other examples, like where Ruby decided to give all her kids Christmas presents, except the 2 youngest because she wanted to punish them. I can't tell if this is from the 8 Passengers or Connection era, but it just seemed appropriate to pop it in here and show you guys now.
So Kevin and I, we have 6 children. The 2 youngest are showing long patterns of selfishness. They have been showing through their choices, their unwillingness to repent, their unwillingness to feel sorrow over some pretty egregious choices that they've made. So Kevin and I have decided that we are going to give the gift of truth to them this year for Christmas. We are going to give them the gift of boundaries, and we're going to give them the gift of repentance. So we sat down with them, and we told these 2 what our expectations were again, and we let them know how deeply sorrowful we've been because of the choices that they've been making, and how it's affected their teachers at school, it's affected their peers, it's affected our home, the siblings, and we just laid it out very clear. And we told them that this year they are not going to be visited by Santa. So they will, and we prepped them, we let them know that the Christmas morning, their 4 older siblings will be getting Christmas presents to open, and that they will have the gift of love from their dad and I, because we want them to really have a visceral experience that hits them. So up until now, I was really hoping that like keeping them home from school and wiping the floorboards would like really bring pain. Like, oh my gosh, I really want to change this behavior that I've been exhibiting. And it wasn't painful for them. They're like, oh yay, we get to stay home from school and clean floorboards. This is kind of fun. It's like, so, they've had these visceral experiences, and they haven't they haven't affected them. It's because they're so numb. And so the more numb your child is, the greater experience, the bigger the outcome. They need to wake them up. You're not going to push a boulder with just your hands. You need some real leverage. And the biggest leverage that a little child has is probably Santa Claus.
It is an example of Ruby threatening not to feed her kids because they're play fighting on the floor.
I'm only going to say it one more time, and then you're going to lose the privilege to eat dinner.
Not even actual fighting, not doing anything wrong, they're giggling with each other until Ruby comes in and threatens not to feed them. Or here's another example where Ruby hasn't let her kids eat and is instead letting them starve until they finish their chores.
And my kids are literally starving. I hesitate to say this because it's going to sound like I'm like a mean barbarian, but I told the kids, I said, I'm not even going to let you eat breakfast until you get your chores done. And this is not a style of parenting. This is parenting. This is truth. And that's why Jodi said this has been around since the dawn of time.
It might be about here you are a parent and you want your child to see you and to love you and to care for you. And most of all, many of us want our children to be our friends. That is not in truth, by the way. We don't want children to be our friends. Your job as a mother and a father or the care provider of any dependent soul is to lead them to truth. That's your sole responsibility. You have no other obligation other than that. You want to launch a child that is charactered. You want to invite them when they get ready to leave your space because they become an adult. You want them to be thriving.
Back and say, whoa, that's mean. You're not going to be loved. Your children are going to kick you out of their lives. So when people say, well, if you do that, then your child's not going to trust you. If you do that, then your child's not going to love you. Well, exactly. I'm just revealing that my child is refusing to love unconditionally. I don't want anyone in my life who's not going to be loving. So if my child will only love me if I give them what they want, then that's not really love.
So this takes a very strong soul because most of us are not even willing to consider not having our children in our lives. And I hope that you'll reconsider.
Aren't just silly online drama, but they can be the precursor to real pain and suffering, especially of vulnerable people. And I know that sounds extreme, but I think once you've seen this video, you'll agree. So just quickly, if you don't know who Ruby and Jodi are, I'm going to play you this clip from my last video to give you some context of who and what I'm speaking about. Feel free to jump to the next chapter if you've seen this before. Ruby Franke is a now 41-year-old woman from Utah who is married to 44-year-old Kevin, although there are some claims that they have been separated for a while and may not be living together anymore. Together they have 6 children: Shari, who is currently 20 years old, Chad, who is 18, Abby, 16, Julie, 14, Russell, 12, and Eve, the youngest, who is just 10 years old. Ruby and Kevin started their family vlogging YouTube channel back in 2015 when the youngest child, Eve, would have been just 2 years old, so it's safe to say that kid has never known a life without a camera being pushed in her face. Poor kid. Now, Ruby and Kevin are members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, so they're Mormons, and they raise their kids to follow this religion too. And as we start to look at some clips from the channel, we'll see those teachings coming out, especially in regards to modesty and the kind of things that Ruby likes to shame her kids for doing or wearing or being. After a series of controversies that we're going to be discussing in more detail at the moment, Ruby started to step back from family vlogging a couple of years ago. She posted less and less on the 8 Passengers channel until it disappeared completely from the internet at the start of 2023. Now, Jodi Hildebrandt is the creator of Connexions, a company which offers counselling, training sessions, online lessons and courses, an online support group and YouTube channel to teach people about relationships, parenting and living in truth. Jodi's also written a crap ton of books as well, but the quality of them... The Connexions website boasts that you can learn to successfully navigate life with Jodi Hildebrandt, MS. And Connexions is a different modality of healing that psychotherapy cannot offer you. You can transform your pain into joy, choose the life you want to have, and exchange your confusion for clarity. So you'll notice right away, tons of buzzwords without much substance. As of 2021, Connexions was primarily run by Jodi, but alongside 2 people, Pam Bodger and Josh Miller. As of 2022, Ruby paid God knows how much money to Jodi and went through her training to become a certified mental fitness trainer with Connexions, a qualification that means absolutely nothing in the real world. At this point, Jodi brought Ruby in to help her make YouTube videos, social media content, and run the Mums of Truth Facebook group. And this was when people finally started to notice Connexions, and it actually grew in popularity, all thanks to the inclusion of Ruby Franke. My own personal little theory on this, and this is just my opinion, was that Jodi was pushing her cult-like teachings with Connexions for a while and not getting anywhere until Ruby Franke was sucked into it. Ruby, by her own admission, was making millions from her family vlogs at the time, and Jodi started to milk her for all the cash she could. She then recruited her by training her to, be this Connexions mental fitness trainer, and brought her on board to help be the public face of the company because Ruby clearly already had a built-in audience. So while this video is going to have a bit less of my commentary and analysis than normal, and just more of like, hey, let's take a look at all these consequences of the things I've discussed before, I think the best way to cover this topic is just kind of go through it all bit by bit, kind of sort of chronologically, but not quite, from the child escaping the home to evidence being discovered and so on. Again, just to give you a warning, because, oh god, this stuff. I'm not going to be showing any graphic images of the injuries that the children received, even though the photos are there. But at one point I am going to be describing the injuries the children received, and it is going to be very difficult to hear, so please be warned. I'm also going to be showing some of the police body cam footage that was released, and while the children's faces are blurred and don't show anything too graphic, again, just be prepared before you watch it, because it's not easy to watch. So first up, this is a summary of the incident report from the police who investigated the case, and they say, on August 30th, 2023, officers responded to a report of child abuse located in Ivins. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Based on the severity of the child's injuries, the child was transported to the hospital via ambulance. A warrant was served on the child's residence, yielding 2 arrests for child abuse. Now, one of the first things we're going to discuss is this witness statement given by the neighbour who helped the escaped child of Ruby Franke. This is the neighbour who called the police. I'm just going to read you a few extracts from his witness statement and intersperse it with footage from his doorbell cam, actually, of what happened when the child came to him for help. On Wednesday, August 30th, 2023, at 10:46 a.m, our doorbell rang. I was slow to answer because I have mobility issues and my wife was in the bathroom. When I answered it, I saw a young boy who had started to walk away. This was startling because our community has no children. I called him back and asked him what was going on. He said he needed a favour. He asked to be taken to the nearest police station. The boy was in socks, no shoes, and walking on hot asphalt and our long rock driveway. I told him to come sit down on one of our patio chairs by the front door. I sat in the chair beside him and asked his name, and he said it was redacted. I asked his age, and he said 12. I asked him where he came from, and he said Jodi's house. That house is about 100 yards away. The child appeared emaciated and malnourished. He also had duct tape around each ankle. And like I say, there's actual doorbell footage of this incident.
Answer the door right now, but if you'd like to leave a message, you can do it now.
Yes.
Hi, I was just wondering if you could do 2 favors.
Well, what are they?
Taking me to the nearest police station. Well, actually, just one's fine.
Well, what's going on, son? Have a seat there.
It's personal business.
Have a seat. What's your name? How'd you get here?
All I simply have to say here is thank God for this neighbour. I am so happy he could be here for this poor child, and it kind of breaks my heart to think what could have happened if these people weren't home, because this kid already went to another house and he tried to get help there and no one was home. And then this was his second attempt, and this wasn't even his first attempt at trying to escape, and I am so thankful for this couple. They are heroes in this, they really are. So this neighbour, whose name is Danny, his statement continues, and he says, I asked him about the duct tape around his ankles, and he said it was personal business, but that it was his fault. I did not press the issue, but became further alarmed. And that's what Ruby and Jodi did to these kids. They made them genuinely believe that they deserved these cruel punishments. It is heartbreaking to hear. And once we get to reading Ruby's diary towards the end of this video, you'll see just how she did that. She has whole passages where she writes out conversations she had with the kids, where she essentially like guilts them into admitting things and admitting fault where there isn't any, and guilt where there shouldn't be any, and it's just horrible. It's heartbreaking.
2221512. I just had a 12-year-old boy show up here at my front door asking for help. And he's said he just came from a neighbor's house, and he's emaciated, he's got tape around his legs, he's hungry, and he's thirsty.
Need someone immediately.
So at this point, Danny's wife Debbie comes outside and they call the police and give the kid some much needed food and water. And God, these people are so thoughtful. They even like stop to ask him if he has any allergies or anything before feeding him. It's just like, oh my God, this is how you be a good person, not the absolute hell that Ruby and Jodi put him through.
He's hungry, and the young man, he sat up with carrying his stocking feet, so he escaped.
We need the police here now.
They're on the right.
You don't have any allergies to that? Okay.
I hear a car, but they're not coming in the driveway.
At 10:25 a.m, I called 911. I told the dispatcher a 12-year-old boy had showed up at our door asking for help and stated that he appeared emaciated and malnourished with duct tape around his ankles. I continued to talk to the child as the 911 dispatcher started to give me questions to ask him. We got his full name and his age as 12. As we began to look at the duct tape around his ankles, we realised that there was saran wrap and blood beneath the duct tape. We also discovered he had duct tape around his wrists, hidden by long sleeves, and again he said, I got these wounds because of me. It was obvious to us that he'd been in bondage. The dispatcher asked his mother's name. He said Ruby Franke, but that he didn't know where she was. When asked, he said he had a 10 and 14-year-old sister in Jodi's house.
But he has duct tape around
And big
his ankle.
injuries, there's sores around them.
Yeah, there's sores around him. I think there's a good chance he's been...
And he also has
and he has been around his
wrist
ankle.
as well.
I mean, his wrist as well. Okay, this boy has been...
Needs immediate attention. Oh, he was such a good kid. Bless your
This kid
heart.
is obviously been... I think he's been...
Thankfully, the lovely couple made him even more food, and they gave him like a little bag of snacks that he could take in the ambulance because he was so hungry, bless him. And then the ambulance arrives. Oh my God, I'm sorry, I'm getting emotional already. The witness statement goes on, and Danny writes, an ambulance arrived at 11:02 a.m. The EMT, and he can be so specific with the timestamps because of the doorbell footage. It tells him exactly when these things happened. The EMTs immediately ascertained that the duct tape covered deep wounds, and they ceased cutting the tape off. When asked how he got them, the child said rope. The wounds were the same on both ankles and wrists. The EMT asked him to walk to the ambulance because they needed to treat him in there. The police officer wanted to carry him, but the child was determined to walk. Debbie gave him her sandals so he could walk across our sharp driveway rocks. The ambulance didn't move for half an hour and then left for the hospital. We're now going to switch back to the police We're now just going to switch back to the police incident report and read the part which provides an overview of officer activity that kind of tells us what happened during that day in terms of police intervention. On August 30th, 2023, officers responded to a report of child abuse located in Ivins. Medical arrived and found child 1 to be in need of immediate care and transported him to the St George Regional Hospital. I arrived at the hospital to speak to child 1. I made contact with Dr. Foster, who informed me that based on child 1's injuries and vitals, he was going to put a medical hold on him. I made contact with child 1 and observed deep lacerations on his ankles with several open wounds. Child 1 appeared to be malnourished, as I was able to see his bone structure. I learned child 1 lives with his sisters. Child 2 redacted, and redacted a third child, the one who's 14, I think, and mother Ruby Franke. I learned child 1 had been living at Jodi Hildebrandt's house since May after moving down from Springville. When child 1 left the home today, he believed both child 2 and redacted were still in the home. Child 1 informed me that he'd not seen child 2 in over a month as they were kept separately in the home. Child 1 knew they were in the home as he had heard them. So I spoke a bit about this in the last video on this topic, but Ruby and Jodi have advocated for isolation as a form of punishment many, many times over, and we see this not just with the kids, but honestly with other adults in their life. Kevin Franke talks about it in his interview as well, how he was isolated from his children, his friends, the rest of his family, and so on, as a form of punishment. Isolating someone like this is both a form of psychological torture and a way to control your victims. If you keep your victims apart, then you keep them weak and they can't work together against you. It's one of the reasons that abusers often seek to isolate their victims from those around them. They're less likely to leave, to fight back, to question you if they don't have anyone else around them, if you're all they're reliant on. Turning them against family and friends, saying things like, if you stay friends with so-and-so, then this bad thing will happen to you, and so on. It's a form of psychological abuse. Isolation in general, from everyone, is also really psychologically damaging. So I found this little article on the Medical News Today website, which was looking at the effect of isolation on prisoners, but I think it's just as relevant here, especially when you consider the fact they were kept in worse conditions than prisoners. This article states that isolation can lead to psychological distress and that the problems associated with it may include, but are not limited to, anxiety and stress, desperation and hopelessness, panic attacks, hallucinations that affect all of the senses, paranoia, poor impulse control, psychosis, fear of death, self-harm or suicide, to name just a few. And when we read Ruby's journals later, we see evidence of pretty much all of this in the kids. They were in such a state. They did have this poor impulse control. They were living in constant fear. They did self-harm quite a lot. They did talk about wanting to die. Isolation like this can also cause physical health problems such as chronic headaches, eyesight deterioration, digestive problems, dizziness, fatigue and lethargy, hypersensitivity to light and noise, loss of appetite, muscle and joint pain, and sleep problems, and so many more issues. It's very clear that these children faced so much more physical abuse than just the wounds they had, and you can know, God, they're bad enough. And it's just absolutely abhorrent. It really is. Hey, gorgeous girl, do you want to come for a snug? Mummy needs it. Come here. Oh, this angel's been everything, haven't you? Oh, love you. The police report goes on and says, I contacted local CPS worker to inform him of the case which just opened. I learned that they had cases with this family up north which went unsupported as they were never able to talk with the family. When the warrant for the residence was approved, I delegated responsibilities to the officers on the scene. All officers present were briefed on the warrant and what items we were looking for. And at this point, we actually have footage of the police arriving at the home for the first time. Jodi is the one who answers the door to them, and she's literally already on the phone to her attorney, waiting for this to happen. It's absolutely crazy.
Police officers, open up! Right there. Contact. Don't move my... Open the door! Jodi? I need you to step out.
I have my attorney.
That's great. Step out of the house.
No, I'm not gonna step out of the
Step
house.
out of the house.
Step out of the house.
Whoa.
We're just gonna see if anybody else. Is there anybody else home?
Wait a minute, how do you come to my house?
Right there.
Look, they come into my house.
Just have a seat right there.
Do you have a search warrant?
Have a seat right there.
Do you have a search warrant?
Have a seat right there. I'll explain everything after. Have a seat right there.
Do you have a search warrant, sir?
Control 12x11. Can you hold the air? We're searching the house.
I can tell you what's in the house.
Okay. Just have a seat right there for me.
Do you have a search warrant?
We'll explain it after this.
You can't just come into my house without a search warrant.
We'll explain everything after this, ma'am. Okay. Well, that's one of the reasons why we're here. So we'll explain after everything's done, after we clear the house and make sure everything's fine in there.
But why are you coming into my house without a
We'll
search warrant?
explain it after this.
But that doesn't make sense. You come into my house and do what you want, and then you tell me you don't have a
No,
warrant?
we'll explain why we did.
But don't you have to have a warrant?
Not at this moment, we don't. We're here on exigent circumstances. And I'll explain it after this, after my sergeant and the officer are done clearing the house. Is there anybody else in the house?
Yes.
2 kids?
There's a little girl.
Just one?
She's right over here.
Okay. How old is she?
She'll be 10 next week.
Okay. And she's on this side?
I have Airbnb guests over there. Probably scared them to death.
Okay.
I had Officer Pickuvit sitting with Jodi Hildebrandt in the office of the residence. I had Officer Hines sitting with Ruby Franke in the attached casita. Sergeant Tobler was sitting with Child 2. After approximately 4 hours, Child 2 agreed to medical treatment. Medical arrived and transported her to the St. George Regional Hospital for medical treatment. I learnt Child 2 was also being held after medical professionals deemed her to be malnourished as well. 2 hours it took this frightened child to come out of the cupboard she was hiding in. 2 hours. That's how scared she was. She was terrified of doing anything against Ruby and Jodi's directions because, as we'll see in Ruby's journals later, she would literally get these kids to just like sit still in one place, not moving for hours at a time. And if they dared do so much as look around, they were punished physically and emotionally. It's disgusting. Like, she would have like 3 days of meals taken away because after 3 hours of sitting on a bench, she looked around. It's barbaric. So, no wonder this poor kid was scared to leave. Again, we have police body cam footage here of the child being found. It is so clear she is terrified. At one point, the officer tries to coax her out by being like, "We got Jodi out here," and the kid's like, hell no. Like, it clearly makes her want to stay in there more. You'll see things like the kid being asked if she's scared, if she needs help. At one point they try and give the kid food and give her some pizza, and the kid's like terrified to eat. She just sits there looking at this box of pizza for like 2 whole minutes straight because she doesn't know if she's actually allowed to take it or not. Oh God. You can literally see how small and skinny and malnourished these kids are. It's heartbreaking.
You come in, my buddy. I'm a police officer. Are you going for the union here? Hey, you okay? Is this just you in here? I'm Sergeant Tobler. What's your name? I just have one. Where's your sister at? Contact one. You okay? Huh? You doing okay? You don't want to talk to me? Yeah, that's okay. Can you come with me though? We got Jodi out here. You know Jodi? She's outside with us. You take your time, bud. I'm in no hurry. I'm a police officer. Did you know that? I don't mean to hurt you at all. You doing okay? Are you scared? Yeah? You're okay. Do you need help? You want to come with me? No? I'm not going to hurt you. Promise. See this right here? It's a badge. It tells me I don't hurt people. I'm just here to make sure you're okay. You're in no way in any trouble. I'm not here to hurt you. I just want to make sure you're okay. And I get if you're scared. I would be too. Okay? You want to come with me? I'm just gonna sit down. It's okay if I just sit here with you. We don't have to say anything if you don't want to. Okay? I'll just sit here with you. Hey, you want to hurry? You can eat? There we go. Whew. Thanks, Deb. If you're more than welcome to eat. You can eat all you want to. That's all you.
Like this clip here with the pizza, we already know from the last video that I made, and you know, all the other evidence out there that we'll see in this video, Ruby and Jodi would repeatedly use withholding food as a punishment for the kids. Like, the kind of infamous one is Ruby's rant about how when this particular kid here, when she was like 4 or 5 or something like that, she forgot to make her own packed lunch for school. And Ruby refused to take her one in when the teacher called up concerned. And she was like, I hope no one else feeds the kid. She needs to learn. She needs to do better. But there's been other instances as well of Ruby giving advice to other parents on the Mums of Truth Facebook group, where she's like, oh yeah, if they don't do X, Y, and Z, withhold their food. You'll see later in Ruby's diary, she talks about fasting for 3 days, which is basically withholding food from the children for days at a time. And water as well. She withheld water. She would punish them for like sneaking and stealing water, as she puts it, because they were like going to the outside hose and trying to drink from that because they were so thirsty. And she punishes them for that. And as we can see from the evidence photos, there was clearly plenty of food in the house. This place was stacked with food. But Jodi and Ruby chose not to feed these children to the point of malnourishment as a form of punishment. It's cruel, it's unnecessary, it's inhumane, and I hope these women rot in prison. They don't deserve to ever be free again. They don't. There are photos released by the police that show these children and the extent of their suffering, and if you want to look them up yourself, you can do. The link is in the video description, but I wouldn't recommend it. Like, in these images, you can see the children's elbows and ankles, shoulder blades protruding inches from their body because there's just not an ounce of fat or muscle on them. There is nothing to them. Nothing a child can do warrants being treated that way by anyone. The report continues, and at this point I'm going to show some evidence photos of what was found at the crime scene. So this is inside Jodi's house. In the search of the residence, officers located several rolls of duct tape, plastic wrap, used rope, cayenne pepper and honey paste, described from victim child 1, used medical gauze, and other documents describing forms of discipline in the household. These items were photographed and gathered as evidence. Now I just want to talk briefly about this mention of cayenne pepper and honey paste, because this is horrible. So what Ruby and Jodi were doing, please be prepared for this section, was they were tying up the children with handcuffs, with ropes, with duct tape as well, so tightly that they were causing gaping open wounds to form on their ankles and wrists. And then Ruby or Jodi would slather these wounds in a homemade paste of cayenne pepper and honey, which was just left out around the house, like open to the air. Just like growing bacteria probably. Rather than using like a proper antiseptic on these wounds, they'd then wrap these wounds in cling film, or plastic wrap as I think Americans call it, and then cover them in duct tape, like wrap them tightly in duct tape. I don't need to tell you how messed up this is, but if I do, an NBC24 article describes this as medically dangerous and potentially painful. Medical professionals state that concoctions like this should not be used on cracked skin or open wounds, or on any skin at all, for more than 2 days in a row. Investigators, however, at the crime scene found a bin full of used cling film with the remains of this paste inside, suggesting that it had been used on the children for a prolonged period of time. Like, look at how much is in here. This is days worth of stuff. The report ends by saying, I learned that the father of the children, Kevin Franke, arrived at Santa Clara Ivins Police Department. Officer Hall was sent to the department, where he detained Mr. Franke until we were able to come back and interview him about his involvement with the children. Now seems like a good point to jump over to the Kevin Franke interviews, of which we have a report summarising the initial interview and a recording of a later interview, which I don't have an exact date for, but it seems it was done a lot later, because Kevin is saying very, very different things, and it seems like after he had some time away from Ruby and Jodi, and he knew what they were actually doing, and he'd been able to reflect on the situation, he tells a very different story in that interview than what we hear from the report of the first interview. Does that make sense? So we'll start with the police report of the first interview from the day that Ruby and Jodi were arrested, and then we'll kind of compare what he said there to what he says in the much later interview that we've got the recording of. Yeah. The first one, Kevin stated he was currently married to Ruby Franke, but they separated on July 25th, 2023, and he's not seen his children since. I think that might be supposed to be 2022. It's been a year. That might be a typo there. I'm not sure if that's on my part or theirs, but there we go. Mr. Franke stated that he did not treat his wife right and struggled with a pornography addiction, which led to them separating with a verbal no-contact order. Mr. Franke informed me that there was no court paperwork, but he and Ruby agreed he would not contact her or the kids. Mr. Franke informed me he had heard from Ruby approximately 4 times since the separation. Mr. Franke stated he loves his wife and family and every morning sees their picture and makes a commitment to be better for his family and end up back with them. So, we saw in my last video that Kevin is not completely innocent in this. He's absolutely not. He was definitely involved in a lot of mistreatment of the kids and really harsh punishments of them while he was still living in the home and while they were making 8 Passengers videos. We've seen the footage. We've seen Kevin doing these things.
Chad, what are you doing over there? You no texting at the dinner table. No texting.
Let me see it. Let me see it.
I see it.
We should clarify that in our house, all our kids know that cell phones are free game for parents, so we can monitor safety.
Yeah, no kid ever said, "Yay, I'm so glad my parents read my text messages." Said no.
What is this? I really like you. Hold on.
I did not say that.
How do you work this stupid phone?
The only downside to giving your kids a flip phone is I swear I have to remember how to work it every time I go through it. Who are you texting?
No one.
A new girlfriend.
Whoa. I really like you. I saw you in my dreams last night.
I'm telling you, it's not her, it was her brother. Look, go down. She said, "I'm so sorry, that was my brother."
Did
How
she?
do I go?
I saw you in my
Oh my gosh, sorry, that was my brother. What is the nature of your relationship with this individual? I mean, there's like 300 texts in here.
Do you like her, or do you just like her? She's a new friend.
That is really, really messy. I don't know.
Okay.
I seen him with her, and he likes her.
Does she like you back?
Probably. No, she thinks he's annoying.
But it does seem like he just kind of disappeared, especially out of the public eye, especially when Jodi came along and got involved, and the more Jodi got involved, the less Kevin was involved, and he was kind of pushed aside. And we actually hear a lot more about that in Kevin's interview later. I did remember asking in the last video, I was like, well, where is Kevin in all of this? Why isn't he there for his kids? And while it doesn't make it clear in this first interview, the second interview, it becomes more obvious. But I think what you'll notice here is, in this first interview, he's still very much entrenched in the cult himself, and he thoroughly believes all the absolute crap that Ruby and Jodi were pushing on him, and yeah, you'll see, don't worry. Mr. Franke said he supports his family financially. Mr. Franke works full-time, and his money goes into a joint account which Ruby pulls to support the family. Mr. Franke informed us he'd received a phone call to come to the Santa Clara Ivans Police Department to pick up his kids. Mr. Franke would not share who contacted him. That is a little bit of a red flag, right? Mr. Franke was aware that his wife, Ruby Franke, was in business with Jodi Hildebrandt, and they ran a podcast together called Connexions. Mr. Franke stated he watched the podcast weekly and enjoyed the content. Again, huge red flag. We've seen the Connexions content, and it's terrifying. Mr. Franke stated he trusts and values Jodi Hildebrandt and her perspective. Mr. Franke informed us his older son, Chad Franke, met with Jodi Hildebrandt previously via Zoom for counselling. Mr. Franke informed us he believes these meetings with Jodi Hildebrandt were beneficial. Mr. Franke did not have knowledge of any other kids meeting with Jodi Hildebrandt. Mr. Franke believed that Ruby Franke and the kids were still living in the residence he moved out of in Springville. Mr. Franke stated he was not aware of the kids living with Jodi Hildebrandt, as he'd not spoken with them or seen them in a year. So in my initial notes when I first read this report, I said, sorry, but how the hell anyone can listen to anything they say on the Connexions podcast and videos and trust Jodi is beyond me. And how can you not have any idea where your children are living? It's just insane to me. I really don't know what to think about this. On the one hand, Jodi and Ruby, as we spoke about in the last video, exhibited a lot of cult-like behaviour, and one of the big parts of that is isolating people from their family, so it makes sense they'd attempt to have more control of the kids by isolating them from their father. But what gets me is why the hell a grown man would go along with this and be okay with his kids just being completely taken away from him. It makes no sense to me. And part of me still feels that way, but the other part of me kind of understands it a bit more now after hearing Kevin's second interview, which we're going to get to in a minute, because he was very much a victim of the cult. That's not to say he's not in any way at fault for kind of allowing, for want of a better word, this to happen to his kids, but I understand his position a lot more now. I do. So the final bit of this says, Mr. Franke stated he completely trusts and loves his wife, Ruby Franke. Mr. Franke stated he still wants to end up with his wife, so with this knowledge, he just can't believe it and feels it can't be true. Mr. Franke stated because he trusts his wife in the care of their children, he doesn't want to say anything that could incriminate him or her. Her or him, there we go. Mr. Franke informed me that they were scrutinised for neglect before on YouTube with their 8 passengers account. Mr. Franke stated that this was because one of their sons, Chad Franke, took to social media to discuss how he slept on a beanbag for 8 months. Mr. Franke stated these allegations were not true and it never happened. This last bit annoys me because we know that's not true. We know it did happen. We know he has mistreated his children before. He has been controlling with them. He has not given them any privacy. He has put them in danger. We know that's true. That bit bothered me. And as we'll see even in the second interview, he still doesn't admit any fault for these things even now. And that's very frustrating and it bothers me a lot. Now, the second interview with Kevin that we have the audio recording for, there's some very, very telling bits in here. A lot of my questions from before start to make a bit more sense now. I'm just going to go through these clips in chronological order of when they were recorded. It's really annoying that there's no date on this file and I couldn't find a date for it, but just using context clues and trying to piece it all together when it was like recording and stuff, this seems a lot later than the initial interview. Like, he's had some time away, he's really learnt what's happened, he's reflected, he's come back, and now these are his thoughts. Now he's away from the cult, you know? So the first thing we have is Kevin talking about knowing that Ruby kept diaries of vision she had and all the things she did in relation to Connexions and so much more. Some pages of these diaries, as I mentioned, have been released to the public and they're absolutely horrific. We're going to be going through them in some detail later in this video. But my kind of worry and concern is that, like, if Kevin at least knew to some extent that these existed, did he also know the contents? And why didn't he do anything? It just, This gives me more questions. But anyway, give this a listen.
I'll ask first, have you found the pen papers?
The pen papers. So we found quite a bit of different journals.
We believe they're on the computer, and the rest of them are sealed, like they're trying to mail them off. But we do not have a direct copy of it, no.
Because my understanding was we had purchased as a Christmas present for Jodi in 2021 a leather folder that, 3 inches thick or whatever, and it had engraved on the leather on the outside the pen papers, and Ruby wrote detailed notes of everything, all interactions with Jodi and Pam Botcher from August 2021 until I don't know when. But
we do have Ruby's journal, which is from those dates that you mentioned.
These things are going to be so... She wouldn't write... The stuff she wrote in the pen papers, she would not write in her journal. The stuff she wrote in the pen papers was not intended to be read by anybody until God would decree them to be written as scripture for the whole world to read.
Okay.
Next up, we get an insight into how and when Ruby and Jodi met, and it turns out it's way earlier than I realised while I was making and researching my last video, so this is definitely interesting. Also, some parts of this were redacted before it was released to the public, so keep that in mind when you hear pauses.
Ruby had a very close friend named Paige Hannah, who lives in Mapleton, who was a massive fan of Connexions and Jodi Hildebrandt. And in fact, the Hannahs are on the cover of their book, if you've probably seen them. And so Ruby started to speak with Jodi towards the end of 2018, early 2019, with the intention of having her be the therapist to Jodi. Jodi always had a larger interest in communicating with the parents more than with the actual patient, which I've always found curious. But her theory was, if you want to help your child, you have to help yourself first, and then you'll know how to help the child. So she spoke with Ruby frequently, and the frequency of their communications ramped up. And then the first conversation that Jodi had with Chad was in June of 2019 while we were on a trip to the East Coast. All of her visits with Chad were virtual through Zoom. But she would talk with Ruby on the phone or through Zoom quite frequently. So Jodi met with things got really, it got strange around the fall of 2020. The Hannahs were trying to convince and bring Ruby into thank you. Thanks. Into this organization called Connexions. And
now this next clip is really interesting because despite what he said in his initial police interview and the report of that, here, now having some time to reflect and get away, Kevin is saying that he wasn't such a big fan of Connexions at first, which is interesting and surprising.
Into this organization called Connexions, and that particularly were focused on things like lust versus love, and healthy marriages, happier marriages, happier relationships. She invited me to go to it was like a conference or something held at Thanksgiving Point in Lehigh. And there were like 100 people there, and that was in the fall of 2019, maybe late summer 2019, late summer 2019. And my impression at that time was this is absolute craziness. This is a bunch of man-hating women that are just looking for excuses to tear down their husbands, and I mean that's what it felt like to me when I was in there. But it was confusing because there were people that I respected a lot that were up on the stage with microphones in hand, giving testimonials of how great this was and how it changed their lives and their marriage, and like the Hannahs were among them, and so yeah, it was confusing. Ruby, then we went on a trip with the Hannahs to the UK in October of 2019, and I swear the whole objective of the trip was to convince me to get into Connexions, because all of them were in it except me, but they made some really eloquent arguments, and I agreed to join a men's group with Jodi in January of 2020, and I would do it for 3 months.
But you'll notice that while he wasn't really into it at first, they did use cult-like control tactics to kind of win him over, to bring him round, to get him on side, you know. They took him on a trip to isolate him from his regular support system and limit the outside information he could receive, and then they convinced him that they were right and he should join them. It's interesting and a little terrifying. The next clip goes into how Kevin was shamed by Ruby and the other women who were part of this cult for simply being a sexual being.
So I started that men's group in 2020. And, you know, the group, I don't know if you've ever been to like an addiction recovery group, but that's what it was. That's what it felt like. I mean, there were probably 10 men in there. It was on Zoom. All of them were like working through, you know, various stages of like sex addiction, porn addiction, drug addiction, and it was just it was like a 12-step group, but intended just for general like addiction recovery. And I really was like, what the hell am I doing here? Like, I don't belong here. But everyone was like, no, come here, like you can learn to have a better like life and a better marriage. And so I thought, okay, whatever. I went through my obligatory 3 months, and I was ready to leave. And then I got challenged to. Oh, thank you. And then I got challenged to sit down and have a vulnerable conversation with my wife and ask her how my lustful choices have affected her. And, you know, to me that was like a loaded question. I thought, you know, I still didn't see what I had done or anything that would constitute any form of like, you know, abuse or anything like that. And but I did. I took the challenge and I sat down, and for 2 hours Ruby very emotionally just shared how she felt in our marriage and how the things that I over 20 years of marriage, you know, asking for sex as a husband frequently, or asking her to wear lingerie or things like that, how that made her feel. And it was really emotional, and it touched me. Like, I didn't realize that she felt so strongly about that she felt so hurt by that. And so I committed that I would really give it a go. And I stayed in the men's group. And so, you know, in that men's group, I met with Jodi every week, with the other men that were in the group. And then it got weird because like our marriage felt like it was getting better and stronger.
Now, normally I would be entirely on the side of the person, in this case Ruby, who is saying, you hurt me. But based on what we've seen in the Connexions videos and the Connexions content in general, about, you know, how Ruby and Jodi would talk about completely normal feelings of consensual lust and desire as being disgusting and shameful, all this does is make me feel sorry for Kevin. It seems like suddenly for him, everything that had been normal to him, which was, you know, consensual sexual contact and sexual desire and just like, you know, his normal everyday feelings towards his wife, suddenly he was being shamed for that and told that they were wrong and disgusting and dirty and he needed to change. And yeah, I definitely think he's the victim here, you know. Where I can't be completely on Kevin's side though, and like where he loses me, is with these next parts like this. Here he talks about how him and his family were cancelled for punishing their son by taking away his bed for months for a harmless prank, and he shows absolutely no remorse for this. We've seen the clips of it. If you're not familiar, here you go.
My bedroom was taken away for 7 months, and then you give it back like a couple weeks ago.
I don't think our viewers know that.
You've been sleeping on a beanbag.
I've been sleeping on a beanbag since October, and they gave my room back like 2 weeks ago. Oh, I'll give you the reason why I lost my bedroom. I think so. I think this is the reason. At least this is the reason that's been in my head. It's pretty funny, but now that I look back, I mean, it's pretty depressing.
No, we never told our viewers.
That I woke Russell up at 2 in the morning and told him that we're going to Disneyland and he has to pack. And he got up and made his bed all neatly and then packed all his clothes in a suitcase. And then he walked out the door and I'm like, Russell, and he's like, what? And he's all happy. Has his sunglasses on.
Do you think it's funny? Because
And then I walk out.
if you think it's funny, then that was 7 months ago. Maybe you need longer without a bedroom.
It was not funny.
Russell got the big bedroom and Chad got the smaller bedroom. And Russell's bigger bedroom also had a bathroom. But what you guys didn't know was Chad didn't get any room. He didn't get anything. He was sleeping on the floor in the family room.
Now compare how Kevin describes this incident to the police. He completely downplays everything. He has no remorse, and this is concerning.
There was the whole YouTube cancel thing. I don't know how much you guys are even interested or aware of that, but in May of 2020, some videos that Ruby released on that dealt with Chad just blew up in her face, and it was all over the news, and hundreds of thousands of TikTokers and all this stuff were just piling on and basically burned down like our YouTube channel. And overnight, like the income went, we lost 90% of the income overnight, and that was hard.
Was this like the, which episode was this? Was this the one where they talked about like the beanbag or?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, and then they started going back and trying to dig and find, and then they'd find these little nuggets like, oh, look, Eve went to school without a lunch one day, or stuff like that. But it was the beanbag video that really set people off.
So then they went back from there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It really bothers me that he's downplaying this and saying he was just cancelled, because that's not what it was. People were really concerned about the way him and his wife were treating their kids. The way the kids were being treated was awful. It wasn't just people online making stuff up or causing drama for the sake of it. It was people genuinely concerned. Again, if you want to see more examples of this, please go watch my first video, because there are so many examples in that, and they're all on video. You can see for yourself. What annoys me a bit as well is that for everything that happened during that time, Kevin is very quick to blame everything on Ruby and Jodi without taking any personal responsibility himself.
So at that time, Ruby was really distraught, and she was looking for support. She was looking for someone who would understand her, who would validate her, and she found that in Jodi. All the stuff she did with Chad was because of Jodi, and so it makes sense that she would go to Jodi, for emotional support when she felt like her world was burning down.
Like, I'm sorry, but you were their father, you were living in the house, you were dishing out the punishments yourself, you were a part of it then. You might not be a part of this abuse now, but you were back then. Next up, Kevin talks about Jodi opening up to Ruby and the other women in the cult about her delusions and hallucinations. She doesn't call them that, but that's what they are. She started having visions of being haunted by shadow figures. And again, this sounds to me, and I don't mean this in a disrespectful way, just an observation kind of way, this sounds to me like Jodi is or was mentally ill with some very, very serious issues, and that Kevin was aware of these issues. So I have to ask, if you know this woman is having delusions and hallucinations, why did you allow her control over your marriage and your children? Why? Makes no sense to me.
And so those conferences and stuff, everything continued like that until March of 2021, when after a conference, a Connexions conference down in St. George, all the inner circle, all the people who were being trained as mental fitness coaches and stuff. So that was Ruby and a bunch of other people and their spouses. We went out to like a dinner afterwards, and that's where Jodi really opened up to the women in a private conversation that she believed she was being tormented and haunted by shadow figures every night. And that was spooky.
Kevin does go on to call Connexions a cult, though, so that's something, I guess.
They referred to it as a cult at the time?
Oh, no. No one in a cult says, I'm in a cult.
Right. I was wondering. But from your perspective, it looks like two cult leaders merging together.
From where I stand now, absolutely.
Yeah.
We see Jodi's mental illness progressing and getting worse and worse, because there's a story at this point of Jodi having a mental breakdown, attempting to harm herself a lot, attempting to seduce a friend's husband, all sorts of really, really dangerous behaviour. And again, I feel a little sorry for Jodi going through that, but at the same time, I have to ask, especially about Kevin and Ruby, why would you allow someone who's going through that herself to provide counselling for your children? At this point, Ruby and Kevin went to stay with Jodi for a bit to try and help her, and apparently he really genuinely started to believe that she was possessed or haunted because... Well, listen to this.
She opened up and talked about, her struggles and what was going on, and I gotta say, I'm a smart guy. I'm an engineer. I've designed and helped build some really big stuff. I've been a college professor. I can't explain some of the stuff that happened while we were there. Like crashes in the basement while we were talking upstairs, and plates in the kitchen just flying off by themselves, full speed, smashing on the wall and falling to the floor by themselves. I can't explain it, but I saw it with my own eyes, and I don't have any way to explain it other than there's some crazy shit going on. And it turned into just a crazy house. The moment she showed up in my house, just the weirdest crap started happening. Lights turning on and off, sounds of people walking in walls, and sounds like footprints going up walls and across the ceiling, and stuff floating around, and it was weird, and I hated it. And I became the resident exorcist. That was the title I came up with myself. I thought it was kind of funny, but it was my job to go and give her blessings whenever she started to go into a trance and go into possession, and which started to be a lot. And Ruby would go up and check on her. It started every 4 hours at night, and then it moved every 2 hours at night, then it moved every hour at night, and then at some point Ruby said, you know what, I'm just going to start sleeping in there, and if I need you, I'll come down and get you. I'm like, that's kind of weird, but okay. And that was that. They started sleeping in the same bed.
Kevin then talks about how apparently Ruby said she started having visions from God, and at this point her and Jodi started sleeping in the same bed and locking themselves away in rooms together for hours at a time. And again, I have to ask, if you know this is going on and your wife and Jodi are having these delusions together, why did you leave your kids with them? That's what I can't get my head around. Ultimately, though, this is what all kind of led up to Ruby and Kevin having a kind of separation, even though they were living in the same house. And during this time, Ruby started to impose a lot of really, really strict rules on Kevin.
Ruby said, I want a separation from you. And it was an in-home separation. And so it was... it was hard. Basically, there were all these rules now placed on me. I could leave when I wanted, but I couldn't come back until Ruby gave me permission. I couldn't come into the kitchen to eat until Ruby gave me permission. And the upstairs where Jodi roamed was completely off limits. I couldn't go upstairs anymore in my own house. And there would be, Ruby would dictate all of the terms of how our interactions would be, when we would talk, and that was hard. And it was during that time that I really became, I would say, dependent upon Ruby. Like, if she said a kind word to me, like, my whole day was made, right? And so that separation continued all the way up until the holidays, maybe the last week of December, first week of January. And then
now again, this is where I'm so conflicted, because on the one hand I'm all like, why are you doing this, Kevin? And on the other I'm like, crap, you're a victim too. This, what he's describing here, is absolutely abusive.
She wanted to legally, like, work with Jodi's attorney to basically give Jodi 8 passengers and become an employee of Connexions. So basically the contract was Ruby gives Jodi everything and Ruby gets nothing in return. Our manager, our YouTube manager at the time, was like, red flags, like, I don't know how to tell you, she is scamming you. Ruby fired him. And I was like, I believe our manager, I think he's right, and Ruby started threatening me with another separation.
It also kind of concerns me when we're hearing this interview. Like, we don't know what happened before or after. We're only hearing this, like, 45-minute clip of it. But it concerns me that Kevin seems more worried about the loss of money than his kids' well-being, you know? Not once in this 45-minute clip, and again, I'm aware we're probably missing some context. He could have said things before or after this clip. But not once did I hear him talk about how the kids were affected by this, except when he said they were all told to stay in the basement one time, which sounds familiar, to be honest. But yeah, it's kind of bizarre. He doesn't really come across as a concerned parent normally would, you know? Next up, Jodi's cult-like status is discussed further as Kevin talks about how Ruby finally asked him to leave the home and for them to split up properly. And at this point, Kevin's status among everyone involved in Connexions was destroyed thanks to Jodi. Again, this is a big tactic of cult leaders. You know, they will create in and out groups. You're either with us or against us. If you don't do everything we say, you will be shunned by everyone, you know?
And Jodi was just piling on me every week in the men's groups. And the other men just do whatever Jodi does. If Jodi piles on somebody, they all pile on. If Jodi praises somebody, they all praise. And so it really felt like a pack of dogs, and Jodi was the alpha. And whoever she, sicked the dogs on, they would go. Whoever she praised, the dogs would just lick them up and down. And that's how these groups went. And so once I was in separation, every week was just hell, psychological hell. And Jodi was running it.
And again, hearing this, I'm really sorry for him going through this. But again, I have to ask, if you know she's like this, why did you leave your kids with her? I genuinely need an answer to that question to understand. Kevin talks more about Jodi isolating him from people, spreading lies about him to other people, Ruby trying to get him to sign over the rights to their house and stuff like that. And again, awful, very cult-like behaviour. So in this next clip, Kevin talks about how when Ruby and Jodi were arrested, he was still deep into believing the Connexions stuff, working through all their books, still trying to please Jodi so he'd stop being isolated. I guess she was stopping him from seeing the kids and stuff like that, but he never actually says that. So I guess this kind of explains the first interview and his responses that we read about in that report, in the last bit. So at least there's some explanation here.
The last communication I had with Jodi was the last week of July. Might have been like the first couple days of August, but just
So
that.
it's just shortly before we made contact with you.
Yeah.
Or
a
you
month.
made contact with us.
A month before.
Yeah.
Okay. So for that whole month, my life was literally wake up, exercise, go to work, pretend everything's okay, come home, do Connexions like workbooks and read scriptures and try to strip selfishness out of my life. Like, go to bed, wake up, repeat every day, boom, 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 boom. I mean, I was so upside down. And my plan was in 6 months, I get to reach back out to Jodi again, and she'll let me back in the group, and then I can prove, oh, I don't know if I heard a door knock, but...
I do still find it concerning, though, that when he's talking about this, his priority and his goal was hopefully she'll let me back in the group with all the other men, rather than hopefully she'll let me see my kids again. Like, it seems like the kids were never part of his motivation. There's no mention of his kids at all. It just, bit odd to me. The person doing the interview finally brings the kids up, Kevin doesn't himself, and clarifies that the last time Kevin saw his kids before the arrest was in 2022.
And then you said, just clarifying, so the last time you saw the kids was when you separated that in July, is that what I'm thinking? Of 2022.
So the other thing that I think it's important for them to know is during that whole time when you were out, you only had communication with Ruby maybe 3 or 4 times. But each time, or at least on some of the occasions you spoke to her, she's telling you that everything's blissful, we're doing well, you know, everything's so much better without you.
Oh, that would be communicated to me by Jodi every week, and the men's groups too. And it was just like, you're abandoning your family. And it always hurt so bad, because it's like, I want to be with my family so bad. What do you mean I'm abandoning them? If you wanted to be with your family, you would change. You would stop being selfish. But you keep being selfish, so you want it. And it was just felt like, well, how do I stop wanting it then? It's like, then you must change. Well, how do I change? Well, you gotta want it. Well, what? You know, so how do I want it? You gotta change. It's this like
perpetual cycle.
Yeah, there's no, I tried to find my way into that cycle, and it felt like, have you ever had a dream where there's like a problem you're trying to solve, but you can't solve it, and how frustrating you feel? That's what my life felt like.
This is followed by revelation that Ruby apparently cleared out the kids' savings accounts and her and Kevin's joint savings account, and God knows how, she somehow had $85,000 in cash in a bag inside Jodi's home while they were arrested. Wild. And finally, we already know that Jodi was apparently giving Chad, the eldest son, therapy, but here's something we didn't know that makes it so much worse.
But I think they need to know that while Jodi was living in your home, she was also purportedly giving therapy to Chad, and Chad was paying her. And he's like, what,
at that time,
15,
we were
16?
paying her.
Oh, okay.
It wasn't until Chad moved out that part of his therapy was he needed to pay for his own therapy. So at age 17, he was paying her $900 a month to get brainwashed.
Dad at 17?
He did.
What was he doing for work?
He worked he's a lifeguard, basically.
Okay.
Lifeguard supervisor at
So
2
his
different
check.
rec centers.
Yeah.
So it was like the majority of his check was going to Jodi.
He was paying her more than he was paying rent, wasn't he?
3 times as much.
And that is where that recording ends. Okay. Now let's move on to talk about what the police found in the house and on the kids. Let's start with the hardest part first to get it over with. The state those poor children were in. There are some very, very graphic images of this that have been released, but I'm not showing them in this video because honestly I can barely stomach to look at them. I don't want to see them again. I don't. they're so much worse than I expected. And I think it's especially shocking as well, because when you go through them on the website, it's just like file names and it's just like numbers. So you're clicking through and you're like, okay, cool. House, 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 gaping open wounds on children. If you don't want to hear this, feel free to skip to the next chapter marker on this video. So both of the youngest children were found isolated from each other, and each was covered in a lot of wounds. Both children had bruises covering their legs, ankles, and feet. The boy, who was 12 years old, had scarring and scabbed over cuts all over his back. The 9-year-old daughter's arms were entirely covered in scarring that is very similar to what I have from, 14 years of self-harming. But I would be almost certain these were not self-inflicted, or even if they were, it's showing a lot of emotional trauma. To see so many cuts like that and so many scars on a 9-year-old child, it's sickening. Both children had wounds on their wrists and ankles from being tied up by rope. This was worse on the 12-year-old boy. Like I said earlier, these wounds had been covered in a paste of cayenne pepper and honey, wrapped in cling film, and then wound tightly with duct tape. And then underneath the tape and the cling film, the boy in particular had wounds so bad on his ankles that it looked like the flesh was rotting and falling off. And on one of the children's wrists, the open wound was at least an inch wide, and it's so deep that inside the open wound you can either see a bit of tendon or bone. It is one of the most horrific things I have ever seen. No person, never mind a child, should ever have to go through something like that. It is inexcusable. It is unforgivable. And I hope Ruby and Jodi rot in prison for what they did to these kids. Around the house, police found countless stacks of bandages, dressings, plasters. The bins, like I said earlier, were full of cling film covered in this cayenne pepper paste that they'd previously used to cover their kids' wounds. Throughout the entire house, there was just no sign that there were any children living there. Like, the wardrobes were completely empty, there were no children's toys anywhere. But there was rope stashed all around the house, in drawers, under beds, on the bathroom countertop. There were stacks of sellotape and duct tape all over the house, in cupboards, on the kitchen countertop, on bathroom counters. It was like basically in every room there was something to bind the children with. There were nappies around the house for both children, despite them being 9 and 12 years old, because they both still had a lot of problems with wetting themselves and messing themselves, which is sadly a really, really common problem amongst victims of abuse. And also within the house, investigators found stacks of journals and diaries belonging to Ruby Franke, in which she kept detailed accounts of the abuse she inflicted upon her children. You can see from these photos just how many of these diaries there were. A selection of pages from these diaries have been released to the public, and if you can stomach it, I'm going to read a few sections of these to you. So the children in this are marked as R, E, and J. You should probably know R is a 12-year-old boy, E is the girl who is 9 or 10, different sources say different things, and J is the 14-year-old girl who mostly, thankfully, was out of the way for this. She was sent off somewhere else. So just to read you some of Ruby's diary entries. On the 1st of July 2023, Ruby wrote, R is to stay outside, sleep outside, only to come inside to use the bathroom and shower. 14th of July 2023. E refuses to work, screams, has hair shaved off. And the thing is, this isn't the worst of it. This is not the most horrific way she treated her children. 15th of July 2023. R runs away around 1:15 a.m. Ruby finds him at 3:14 a.m. God, I wish that could have gone away. He tried so many times to get away. That boy is like a little hero. He genuinely is. Now, remember in the last section I mentioned about police finding nappies in the house because the kids were still having accidents, and that's a sign of abuse? Well, Ruby talks about that here, and she just blames the kids for this. It's not their fault at all. 9th of July 2023. R turns 12 tomorrow. I never envisioned him being 12 and still pooping/peeing himself. Satanic choices lead one to being destitute, even in the most affluent homes. Like, no. Abuse leads children to being traumatized. That's what's happening here. The only person or being or entity or anything hurting your kids is you, Ruby. It's sickening. This woman is a monster, and she keeps blaming her children for the harm she is doing to them. She's so far past delusional, it's unfathomable. July 10th, 2023. It's R's birthday, and he doesn't even know what month it is. E and R have been in so much deviant behaviour they won't control their bodily functions. They're both furious. Their selfish, sinful lifestyle is being intervened upon. I told R he emulates a snake. He slithers and sneaks around looking for opportunities when no one's watching, and then he scurries. If he wants to emulate the Saviour, he needs to be 100% obedient with exactness, not wavering. No wavering, no hiding. It doesn't feel real how anyone can speak about their children this way. Like this... I've spoken a lot in videos about like villains in literature and how to write a good villain, and you have villains narrating books like think of John Fowles as The Collector, or Nabokov's Lolita, or Anthony Burgess as The Clockwork Orange. They're all narrated by villains, and they're very uncomfortable to read, and it's sickening to read them being often so nonchalant or making excuses for their abuse, but this is a real life version of that. And when I was reading this, it almost didn't feel real to think that an actual real person can think this way and speak this way and do these things to her own children. I just feel like I kept wishing like it was fake, But part of me feels like we shouldn't be surprised. Like, we heard the things they were saying in the Connexions videos publicly. And if she was saying all that horrible stuff to the public, it shouldn't be any surprise that what she was saying in private was even worse, But she writes, R lies. I mean, all the time. He's a compulsive liar. But can you really blame him when he's living in constant fear and he's being punished daily for just merely existing? Of course he's going to try and do whatever he can to get out of it. You can't blame him for that. He's a scared kid. I never would have suspected. The entire experience is a shock to my system. I never would have suspected the cold, dead heart R has. Didn't know where to look. He's always been able to get what he wants. And now he can't. He's furious. I told him if he divulged everything, he would automatically be repenting. I told R that he needs God. I invited him to fast and pray. R is something out of possession. He is workable and calm for a bit, and then angry and defiant the next. The only consistent thing about R is that he lies. I don't know if you saw in my last video, but there was a lot of moments in the Connexions content where Ruby and Jodi talked about how children are manipulative by simply existing, and it was really, really disturbing to hear. And I spoke about how damaging that could be, but this is the damage. These are the real life consequences of those awful beliefs. It's not just these women saying awful things like kids are manipulative. It's Ruby saying, my children are manipulative, and therefore I'm going to hurt them in this way, and this way, and this way. She writes, E has behaved, and this is a 9-year-old girl, remember. E has behaved with Jodi. She likes to think she can still manipulate me. I gave her a pixie cut. All her long hair is gone. No more distracting with hair. This is just about control and abuse and punishment, and it's sickening. 11th of July 2023. Big day for evil. E manipulates me. She won't scream when Jodi's around. Probably 'cause she's even more scared of her than you. But with me, she wails. All night, E screamed and cried and would hit her head on the tile floor. Today, Jodi confronted her. E admits to putting on a show for her mother. E says she wants to be pitiful. The things they manipulate these kids into saying and admitting. Here's a kid clearly displaying self-harm behaviour because she can't cope with the abuse she's facing. You are causing this self-harm. And all Ruby and Jodi can say is that, like, oh, she's being manipulative. Like, I'm sorry, but no. When someone has faced that constant level of abuse and they turn to self-harm because they don't know what else to do, that is never about manipulating someone else or controlling anyone else. And to even think that is sickening. And it says more about you and your sick, sick head than anyone else. R was told to stand in the sun with his sun hat. He's defiant. No, I tell him a couple more times. R, or should I say his demon, stays in the shade. I push R into the sun. R comes back. I come back with a cactus poker. When I poke his back to get in the sun, R doesn't even flinch. I poke him on the neck. He's in a trance and doesn't appear to feel anything. This kid is clearly dissociating, which is a trauma response, and she just responds by abusing him physically even more. The police photos showed that he had, like, his entire back was covered in scars and cuts that had, like, scabbed over and stuff. And, like, this is very clearly one of the causes of that. It's like she's bragging about it, and I don't know how you can be such a monster that you can write about abuse in such a matter-of-fact, cold way like this, like it's nothing. You have to be absolutely sick to do this. And it gets worse too, so after she's poked him in the back like this and tried to get him out in the sun, she says, I take my old mop water and go to R. I show R the water, then I pour the water on R. This kid is so lucky he didn't end up with a really severe infection. She keeps hurting him over and over, and then she writes about how she goes up to him, like, immediately after she's hurt him, and starts saying that she loves him. It's just her love, and that must have been so confusing for this poor child. You do not hurt the people you love. You just don't. In another passage, she writes, then I put my hand tightly over his nose and mouth. The devil lies and says I'm hurting you, abusing you, but what am I really doing? You are putting oxygen on me. It's sick. That's the only word for it. In other passages, she accuses him of stealing water because he needs a drink. She does this so many times, it's disgusting. R is compulsive. He feels no remorse for his choices. He shuts down, says he wants to go to jail. R says he worships the devil and he has no interest in changing. And yet this doesn't surprise me either. You spent his entire life telling him that it's either the God or the devil, one or the other. If you don't do what we say, you're worshipping the devil. This is God's love, this is the devil's. Whatever. Like, so, when you're telling him that the abuse you're inflicting on him is God's love, of course he's going to want to go the other way. This kid is reaching out for help and basically begging you to stop and saying, I can't cope with this anymore. And he's trying to express that in the only way he knows how, which is to go the opposite direction and say he's going to worship the devil. He's using the only language he has to try and express his pain, and she can't see that. E told me she figures they'd been here 8 weeks. I asked E if she felt like she'd made progress over the 8 weeks. Yes. I told her she was delusional. She's made no progress. She continues to manipulate. Last night her screaming and trance headbanging were evidence of no change. No, they're evidence of her trauma and your abuse, you monster. It just keeps going and going. 12th of July 2023. This is the day E anticipates breaking her 2-day fast. When we got home, Jijo, who I think is meant to be Jodi, when we got home to Jijo, I let R know she has hardened her heart and will do 1 more day of fasting to invite her to humble. E flips out and begins ranting. She refuses to get up. She lies on the floor all day speaking dishonest chants. All day E makes rhymes about, my mum starves me and calls it fasting. My mum won't lift a finger and bring me food because all she does is lie on the bed and eat brownies. I'm gonna run away. Jijo helped me intervene after work. Allowing lies to be spewed gives the devil a platform. Articulating lies reinforces possession. The longer lies are allowed to be spewed, the larger the intervention, and the physical intervention needs to be. I cut off more of E's head, as in her hair. We doused her with water in the dog wash. E said she wanted to run away. Jodi told E she has no idea what's waiting for her. So disturbing. I don't know what more I can say about this. These are selfish children who desire only to take, lie, and attack, and have zero understanding of God's love for them. They don't know Jijo is selling her home, this priceless Snow Canyon gem, so she can purchase land where those two can work. Apparently Jodi said to Ruby, I can't in good faith leave you with those two gremlins. I won't do that. I just don't get how anyone could let anyone speak about their children that way. Also, like, is anyone else concerned by Ruby writing Jodi's name as Jijo? I don't quite know what that stands for, but I kind of had this like feeling, I'm like, do you think Jodi has delusions that she's God? And that's what this whole G thing, it's very, very weird. Sending evil away in a long time possessed person is not a one and done deal usually. These wicked spirits in E&R have been pals long before this life. How E&R got to come and get a body can only be explained in me advocating to be their mother. This is not a conceited statement. God knows I would take my responsibility seriously. Jodi volunteered to help. These two souls are very weak of mind. They are fools, truly. E said she would choose the devil over God. What arrogant spew. If you can engage a weak-minded soul in a physical activity of obedience, you can begin to break the bond Satan made with the weak. Physically stop the acting out behaviours and begin physically doing good. Farm work, lifting boxes, exerting energy, exercises, jump rope, milking cows. And again, this is so similar to a lot of the things they were saying in the Connexions videos, and this is why I think it's important to show this, because it's easy for us to sit there watching those videos like I did in that last video and say, see, these harmful teachings could be used to hurt kids, they could be used for this could lead to this. But here we're actually seeing, yes, this was used to justify actual, repeated physical and emotional abuse of vulnerable children time and time again. This proves the harm is not just hypothetical and that we need to continue being aware of it and call it out and stop it. God, it just keeps going. And it never stops. And this is just over the course of a few days. These kids had months of this, years of this. I really hope all the kids involved are getting the therapy and care and kindness that they need and deserve right now. And I hope that they can heal and be happy in the future. And I hope that through videos like this, we can raise more awareness of these issues and not allow this to happen to any more children. That's what we need in this. E had another episode with demons. She gives herself to them. She agreed to stop being deceptive with her facial expressions and crying and whining. Whining is the devil's voice. Whining is always a demon. E's hurt facial expressions blame me for her misery, because Ruby is at fault. She is to blame. It is E at the centre of her misery. Her face is deceptive. 14th of July 2023. E woke up. I reminded her that if she whined, cried, or squinted her eyes at me, or soured her face, I would be buzzing her hair. If she was going to act sick, she can look sick. She agreed with a smile. I told her because she didn't listen the night before, she would do 2 sets of boxes/stairs with a 5-minute break. She did the first set easily and agreeably. After a 5-minute rest, she began whimpering. When she got to the bottom stair, she slipped and dropped the box. I put her in the dog wash and shaved her head, then back to the boxes. The next section is one that I spoke about earlier, where she punishes her daughter for the simple act of looking around after being stuck on a park bench for an hour. It's disgusting. It's all about control with this woman, and it's vile. Nothing about this is helping your kids or teaching them anything good, or I don't know, it's all about control. Ruby goes on in this next section about bragging to her son R about her getting to sleep in a soft bed while he had to sleep on the floor. She never gives him a bed. Never. She calls him a demon and tries to get him to admit that he's a demon. I can't even begin to think how much this would have messed with the kid's head. She makes her daughter sleep on the basement floor too. There's more instances of her withholding food and making them do physical labour. It's just constant. She never lets up with them, ever. On the night of the 15th of July, the son tried to run away in the night. We kind of saw that summary earlier. So after that, Ruby started tying him up at night to stop him escaping. And that's how he got those wounds. On the 16th of July 2023, she calls R a weak-minded, undisciplined brat. By the 23rd of July, Ruby and Jodi took away the children's shoes to stop them running away. Can't believe I'm even saying these words. E and R barefoot to increase discomfort and decrease running away. By the end of July, Ruby writes about locking E in a closet and having wounds all over her feet and ankles, which Jodi cleans, even though the child doesn't deserve to have her wounds cleaned. Ruby then has the cheek to mock her son for wanting to be shown affection and dares to call him asking for the bare minimum from her abuse. It's just so warped. I don't get how she can starve her kids for days and thinks that's loving and absolutely fine, but the minute he's like, Mom, I just want you to love me and care for me, she's like, you're abusing me. It's warped and it's sick, but again, it's what we saw in the Connexions videos. They posted this stuff publicly. The physical violence from Ruby continued to escalate into early August, with passages like this. R becomes aggressive and destructive. He started banging and hitting doors. I went in and kicked him. Knock us off. R continues to be destructive and violent. I put on a pair of boots. I went in and kicked him again. You want me to stop? What are you getting from Satan when he tells you to kick the door? I just can't believe she's writing this like it's normal. There's a few more pages like this, and then we get to the end of the stuff that was released to the public, and it's one of the worst things I've ever read in my life. It's chilling. I hate everything about these women. And I think the scary thing is that, like, Ruby doesn't seem to even show any remorse now. She didn't even seem worried when the police turned up. She seemed annoyed that they'd interrupted her. Like, look at these clips of Ruby Franke when the police arrived and when she was first arrested. It's like she just couldn't care less. She seems annoyed with the police for interrupting her, not remorseful, not guilty, not worried about her kids. Just, I don't understand people like this. I don't.
Okay, come on out, please. We'll go that way towards that door. What's that? Downstairs in the interview room. So I could have gone that way, but appreciate you opening the door. Go to the honor and remove them. This way, yeah. Okay, go ahead and have a seat.
And Ruby isn't the only one who doesn't seem to care at all. The final thing we're going to be looking at in this video today, because I cannot go on with this, are recordings of phone calls that Jodi Hildebrandt made from jail. These were again released in the evidence bundle, or rather select clips of them were. In this one from the 18th of October 2023, Jodi cries because she's not apparently being allowed to raise kids anymore. Apparently it's heartbreaking to her that her abuse is called abuse and the devil is constantly trying to attack her. She thinks she's the victim in this. It's sickening. She shows no remorse for what she's done. She's a monster.
Nightmare here, Dennis. Nobody wants
Oh,
the truth.
yeah.
Nobody wants the truth. Nobody wants the truth because these kids, I told Doug, I woke up, the spirit told me, it's all the devil. I mean, you've seen him. I mean, I've known you, for 5 years? You've watched him come at me, come at me, come at me, come at me. And you're exactly right, because he knows I know what he's doing. And he uses these kids. And he uses all of us as the adults, the parents that don't hold the kids accountable. So now it's abusive to make a kid sleep on the floor. It's abusive. Or it's abusive to, that's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. You can't even raise your kids anymore.
The next clip, Jodi tries to claim that her and Judy didn't hurt the boy at all. He did it all to himself. Again, shifting the blame, victim blaming is disgusting.
So what I'm saying is you're being crucified in public opinion.
Yeah.
So your fear has to be super prepared. And the only way he's going to get prepared is if you push him and ride him.
Okay, I will. I'll call him today.
Yeah.
He doesn't seem really animated. He seems like, the pictures are going to destroy you. And I'm like, we didn't do that. We didn't do that. Those pictures we did not do. He did that to himself, yes. Did we put that on him and then he rubbed around and cut himself? Yes. But we didn't do that.
And as we saw from Ruby's own admissions in her diary, this just isn't true at all. Sure, there was some self-harm behaviour from the kid, but that's an absolutely understandable response to abuse and neglect and harassment. It absolutely is. It's not his fault that they drove him to that. But again, looking at Ruby's diaries, there were absolutely admissions of those two women tying the kids up, kicking them, poking them with sharp objects, locking them in rooms, making them walk around barefoot, starving them, not allowing them to drink water, making them sleep on the floor, and so on. Jodi is lying here, and she is a disgrace. Even the day before this, on the 17th, on a different phone call, she's gone on about how she hasn't done anything wrong. I don't get how she can really believe that.
I mean, I shouldn't be here. I haven't done anything wrong.
Right, but my goodness.
You have 1 minute remaining for this call.
Run out of time.
But it was like everything got taken out of the house, and it's in a storage unit so that I could come to jail. It sounds crazy, but it really feels that way. And I don't know if I'm going to be like some kind of example, but when I get out of here, I have a story to tell, and I am going to try to do everything I can to protect the children, because that's what's happening, is that kids are being horribly abused.
Yeah, absolutely.
And instead of the kids, anyways, it's a story, but when you come on about it.
Yeah.
And unlike Kevin, who the longer he got away from the cult, the more he started to realise how harmful it was and was kind of remorseful, Jodi never displays that. This is a recording from a phone call on the 5th of February in which she says this.
And the children shall rise up against their parents and shall cause them to be put to death. That statement right there is what's going on with me. The children shall rise up and put their parents to death, and ye shall be hated of all men for my name's sake.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
I probably cried for an hour straight. Just everything clicked, and I said, I'm happy to go to prison. Because if you continue to read the rest of the chapter, he's like, be grateful. If you're in this situation, be grateful, because you're
grateful.
And you will be saved. And
that's quite experience to read that from your perspective right now. Wow.
Well, I have just been begging him, like, you've got to explain this to me. Like, I cannot logically figure out what's going on here. And that's it. That's what's going on. And the spirit. I mean, I just was.
Cool.
Well, I have, like I said, I have probably every single day just been, trying to logic, trying to understand, trying to be humble, trying to say,
sure.
what's happening?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You're living a puzzle, trying to put the pieces together.
So she's still blaming the kids because she has to face the consequences of what she did to them. It's sick. She still doesn't fully understand what she's done. And on these phone calls, she's still talking about the principles of truth and all that other Connections nonsense that we heard about in the last video and in all their Connections clips. It's clear she hasn't learned anything at all. She feels no remorse. She is still pure evil. And that's why I don't think these 4 consecutive prison sentences are long enough for these women. They're never going to change. They're disgusting, they're cruel, they're evil, and they don't deserve to be out in the public where they can potentially be around children or influence people with children ever again. Some clips of phone calls from Ruby were also released, but honestly, I don't think I can stomach this anymore. I think I need to end the video here and take a few days off after I've edited and released this, because this is a lot. I don't think making a video has ever affected me this badly before. I think it's one thing to read about bad things happening to people, but it's another to actually see it, and to see those wounds on the kid, and then immediately after to read about the person who inflicted them just not giving a damn, and not feeling any remorse, and almost gloating about it. There's something about this that just hits different for me, and it's just, I'm not going to use my regular outro on this video because it's far too upbeat for all of this. But what I will say is, if you've made it through this video today, thank you for watching. Thank you for bearing with me while I've been all emotional. I hope that we can all learn something from this, and I hope we can all, I guess, try and take away something positive and go forward trying to help more people. I hope now we're a bit more aware of the warning signs. We know how serious these issues are. It's awful because you know more kids are going to go through this at some point. But if we can all be aware and maybe help like at least one kid escape from something like this, or not have to go through something like this, then I don't know, surely that's worth it. I don't know. Sorry. Anyway, if you have made it through this video today, thank you very much for watching. I do appreciate your time and the emotional effort it must have taken to get through this. Yeah, thank you all for your support, and hopefully I'll see you again soon with a little bit of a easier, more manageable video than this, you know? If you do want a bit of a palette cleanser, then maybe you can go check out my second channel where I've got some really nice, light-hearted videos talking about books and makeup and some nice stuff over there if you want. But for now, yeah, thank you for watching, and I'll see you again soon. Although, like I say, I might need a few days off after this. I definitely need a few days off.